everybody, and welcome back to another video. My name is Sarah, and today I'm here to give you some nonfiction book recommendations. Now, I know my channel typically revolves around fiction, primarily, fantasy, horror, mystery thrillers, those kinds of things. However, I do like nonfiction. I primarily consume nonfiction through audiobooks. It's just kind of the best way for me to motivate myself to read nonfiction, because although I know that I enjoy certain realms of nonfiction and have a good time and find them fascinating to read, I'm not always motivated to actually pick up a physical nonfiction book. And so the audiobook, just while I'm on a walk or cleaning, those kinds of things, is really good. A good way to just consume those books that you want to read but maybe don't have the motivation to quite so much. And so most of these books I don't have physically, but I do have a handful of recommendations, and then I'll kind of go through some books that I have hopefully coming up in the future that I plan to read. So the first book that I have to recommend that I have already read is the only book that I own physically, and that is Dark Archives, a librarian's investigation into the science and history of books bound in human skin by Megan Rosenblum. So if you like weird, macabre science, this is really great to pick up. I flew through this, absolutely loved reading it physically, which was surprising, but I just couldn't put it down. It is absolutely fascinating. It goes through not only the science behind testing to see if artifacts are truly bound in human skin, but also just the history behind each of the books that have been tested and proven to be bound in human skin, kind of the history behind the ones that everybody thinks are bound in human skin and actually aren't. So there is kind of this misconception that books bound in human skin are kind of these occult, kind of dark magic witchy books, and that is not the case. The vast majority of them are not those types of books, and we're not bound in human skin for that reason. If you want to know kind of the real story behind it, highly recommend picking this up. So then next I have a memoir, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. Highly recommend listening to this on audio because Chanel narrates it herself, and I think that she does a phenomenal job, and it just really makes this story that much more emotional and impactful. So Chanel Miller was the victim in the Stanford swimmer rape trial, where Brock Turner in 2016 was only sentenced to, I think, about 6 months in prison. And it is Chanel's story from leading up to the night of the crime itself, and everything after that, and how traumatic it is for a victim of a violent crime to have to consistently be reliving the crime itself during the extremely drawn-out process of the American legal system. And she talks a lot about how she had to face a lot of victim blaming, how she wasn't really considered the perfect victim, and because of certain actions that she may have taken, people then tried to make it sound like it was her fault or she brought it onto herself, when that is not the case at all. Brock Turner is the only one responsible for what happened to her, and he is the one at fault. And how the legal system and just society in general takes a look at a white man who is in a kind of affluent position and kind of a successful position, and how the society then wants to be very lenient and how they have that sort of privilege. It is an extremely heartbreaking story, and it is very hard to stomach throughout the entirety of the book, but I think it is one that I think more people need to read, just because it is a very eye-opening look at what a victim of a violent crime has to go through when pursuing pressing charges and taking a case to court. And then I also would like to recommend Killers of the Flower Moon, The Osage Murders, and the Birth of the FBI by David Grann. Again, listen to this on audiobook. I think that the production of it was done very well in terms of just the listening experience. This is another book that made me very angry at times. This is just what it says, The Osage Murders and the Birth of the FBI. So this book follows the slew of very ghastly murders that occurred in the 1920s to the Osage people. The Osage people at that time were awarded head rights for the oil deposits that were on their land. And you can imagine, because they became very wealthy, somebody did not like that, or a group of somebodies did not like that, and it's the story of how several people decided that they were going to try to get away with murder and get the head rights and the money involved in that for themselves, but how this case then instigated the birth of the FBI, and kind of how those two storylines became such big historical markers in the United States. The vast majority of this is focused around the Osage murders and less around the development of the FBI. However, that is a piece of it, and it is very interesting. I think that this was just really well put together, and it is very focused around the Osage people themselves and the generational trauma that they have endured moving forward from the 1920s. Next, I have another, I guess, kind of memoir, kind of collection of essays, Smoke Gets in Your Eyes and Other Lessons from the Crematory by Caitlin Doughty. This is also narrated by the author herself, and again, I think it just adds a lot of emotion to the story. This is less sad, but it gets sad at times. Basically, it is Caitlin exploring her experience with death and how that brought her to working in a crematory, her experience starting out in a crematory, and how it is kind of unusual for a woman to work in the death industry. She also talks a lot about how sanitized the American death industry has become, how commercialized it's become, how we've really moved away from a kind of ritual perspective and we keep death at more of an arm's length, and how that really builds into the sense of unknowingness of what happens to your body after you die, and then this sense of fear as well, and how she has kind of made it her life's work to make the American people more comfortable with the concept of death and kind of caring for loved ones' bodies after they're gone. And it's just super interesting. It definitely gets a little gross at times. She's quite funny, and there are also some very emotional and just hard to listen to moments, but I think that it is just a really well done collection of essays that kind of make up a memoir, and I would definitely recommend it. And then next, I do have another true crime book, that is I'll Be Gone in the Dark, One Woman's Obsessive Search for the Golden State Killer by Michelle McNamara. So this was an audiobook that I listened to pretty early on when I first tried to kind of dip my toe into the nonfiction realm of books, and I thought that it was really, really well done. Again, this is a true crime novel. It is written by Michelle McNamara as she discusses the Golden State Killer, his crimes, and how she became obsessed with trying to keep this case from going cold, keep it in the view of the public, and keep it alive, because the investigators could not figure out who the killer was, because it happened over so many jurisdictions in California, and there was not very good coordination. There was a lot of silos of information that was really hard to get access to and kind of cross those logistical barriers. And it is her story of how she became obsessed with trying to solve this crime, how she compiled her research, and just how she presents all of the facts of the case that she has gathered from interviews, from finding access to the documents that have been released to the public, as well as the research that had been compiled from other kind of internet investigators. And it was just a really interesting perspective on how a crime is investigated, as well as a look into this slew of crimes as well. She does a very good job also of trying to make sure that she is victim focused and less glorifying of the Golden State Killer. And I just think it was really well done. Highly recommend it. And then I have a collection of essays, Hood Feminism, Notes from the Women White Feminists Forgot by Mikki Kendall. I think this is one of those really important books that if you consider yourself a feminist, if you want to learn more about feminism, if you want to just expand your knowledge in general, this one is really important because much of the feminist movement has been propelled forward by white women, particularly middle-class white women. And because of that, so many other demographics of women have been forgotten about, just like the title says. And so many issues need to also be taken into consideration. If just middle-class white women are focusing on their own issues, they're forgetting about all of these other issues that their fellow women and men as well, who also benefit from kind of the fight for feminism. These issues are important and they need to be addressed. And I think Mikki Kendall does a really good job of really fleshing out a lot of these topics. She gives a lot of really good kind of background information to give you a good basis into why these topics are so important for women of all demographics and how it needs to be addressed, and how if the feminist movement is going to be actually successful in equality and equity for women, it needs to consider all women and men as well. And I just think this is a really good series of essays. And then the last book that I have to recommend is actually one that I just recently finished, and that is A Light in the Dark, Surviving More Than Ted Bundy by Kathy Kleiner-Rubin and Emily Lebow-Lucchesi. And this book follows Kathy Kleiner-Rubin from a very young age up through her 30s, where she had basically, she calls them death sentences. When she was 12, she was diagnosed with lupus and had to go through treatment for that. When she was 20, she was actually in the sorority house that was attacked by Ted Bundy. She was severely bludgeoned in the head, and the only reason why she survived was because a car's headlights shone through her window while Ted Bundy was attacking her and scared him off. So he was unable to continue attacking her because he ran away. And then when she was in her very early 30s, she was also diagnosed with breast cancer. So the vast majority of this book does focus on Ted Bundy, his victims, her experience with him, her experience in the trial, and leading up to finally his sentence and execution. It is very, very victim focused, which is amazing. I think that she does a really good job of making sure that you remember that Ted Bundy was a monster. She also really focuses on debunking this kind of legend and myth of Ted Bundy. Everybody thinks that he was very charismatic and he lived kind of this double life, and was so charming and able to use his charisma to lure women into his car to kill them, where that is not the case. You can count on like one hand the number of times he was actually able to convince a woman to get in his car with him, and that was by him either pretending to be a person of authority or playing a sympathy card and pretending he had a broken leg. He was not charming. There are so many accounts of women who did run into him and found him creepy and unsettling. And the vast majority of women that he attacked and killed, he either attacked them in their bed while they were sleeping or from behind, and kind of tackled them that way. He was not a charming man, and the media has kind of developed this weird persona of him and continued to present it to the public when that is not the case. And it really talks about how everybody wants to talk about Ted Bundy, but nobody wants to remember his victims. And so I think that she's done a really good job, not only highlighting her experience as a surviving victim, but how we need to remember all of the victims that did not survive. And then I do just want to mention some of the books that I either currently reading or going to read pretty soon or have on my TBR. So I did just start a nonfiction audiobook today, actually, and that is Nightmare Fuel, The Science of Horror Films by Nina Neseth. I'm only on the first chapter. We're basically talking about what happens in your brain to process fear and to kind of determine the various ways that you can react to something fearful, whether that be when it's actually happening to you or while you're watching a horror film. And this book is basically talking about why do we like horror films and why do we like to be scared. So really looking forward to dive more into that one. And then later this month I do have another nonfiction book that I'm going to be picking up for a book club that I'm part of. That is Over My Dead Body, Unearthing the Hidden History of America's Cemeteries by Greg Melville. I'm really looking forward to that one. All I know is what the title says, but that one I do plan to pick up later on in this month. And then I actually do have 2 physical books that I own on my TBR that I do hope to pick up pretty soon. The first one I've had on my TBR for quite a while now, and I just need to pick it up. That is Slender Man, Online Obsession, Mental Illness, and the Violent Crime of Two Midwestern Girls by Kathleen Hale. So this one I picked up for a couple of reasons, because I've always found the kind of myth of Slender Man very fascinating, and kind of that online internet creepypasta story. But the other reason is because this is about the 2 young girls. They were like 12, I think, and how in 2014 in Waukesha, Wisconsin, which is not that far from me, they stabbed one of their classmates in order to try to sacrifice her to Slender Man. And it's kind of, the story of the kind of how they became obsessed with this kind of internet story. So looking forward to picking this up. And then I also have The Watchmaker's Daughter, the true story of World War II heroine Corrie ten Boom. So this is following Corrie ten Boom and her family. They lived in the Netherlands, and how they helped hide Jewish families. They were captured, they were sent to camps, Corrie was tortured, and how after her release and after the end of World War II, how even then she continued to house Jewish families who now no longer had a home, and helped them get them on their feet. And so really looking forward to picking this one up as well. So those are my nonfiction book recommendations, as well as the ones that I'm hoping to pick up relatively soon. If you've read any good nonfiction books recently, let me know down in the comments. If you plan to read any of the ones that I listed, let me know. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you consider sticking around and subscribing if you haven't already. And as always, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!